Hey Panda Nation, you are listening to the Inverted Gear podcast with your hosts Nelson and Hillary. Join us every week as we take you behind the scenes into our brand, discuss upcoming projects, and conversate beyond the mat with the interesting people we've met along the way.
Hey Reilly, how are you?
I am great. Great to see you guys.
Where are you in the world right now?
I am in Utah, Kanab, Utah, in an Airbnb.
It looks like a nice one.
Yeah, they've decorated like a Pier 1 Imports or something in here, but that's how they always do it.
So what's going on? Are you doing a camp or?
No, it's my sister's wedding, so I'm in town for the
Oh.
wedding week.
Very cool.
Fun.
We haven't seen you in a while because the whole traveling thing is kind of difficult right now.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy because I feel like we usually get to do a lot of traveling together and doing stuff, but we're staying afloat over here.
Yeah,
well, not here, but in California.
Since last time we saw you, you moved out of Berkeley.
Yeah,
and you're a mountain man now.
Yes, definitely.
You're an old-timey prospector.
Yeah, I've moved to a place called Corskell, which is near Yosemite, and I moved on a 122-acre ranch where Megan raises chickens, and we have fresh eggs, and we have a garden where we grow our own vegetables, and it's pretty rad.
That sounds so awesome.
So, but I still teach in Jiu-Jitsu in Berkeley and San Francisco. So I drive in Tuesday for 3 hours, teach for 3 days, drive back Thursday night, and smash a lot of audiobooks on my commute. So I'm still teaching in Jiu-Jitsu a lot.
Very cool. And then you're running the camps out of your little compound?
Yeah, so before I moved, I had run 2 or 3 camps. I ran 2 camps out of the Bay Area where I was doing half the camp in Jiu-Jitsu in Berkeley and then half the camp at the Richmond Rod and Gun Club, the shooting part. And then after COVID, I had to cancel a camp. And then I bought this new property, and now on the property is quite large. I've built a bunkhouse. I've built a gym. I built a gun range. So it's all self-sustained now on my property. Very
cool. And the shooting you guys do is what's it called? It's like a sports still shooting?
So action shooting is the broad term for the type of competitive shooting that I do and what I'm teaching. So action shooting you can make the distinction between action shooting and like what you see at the Olympics. You have basically 2 kind of categories of sports. The Olympics, you have bullseye shooting, which is what you see stationary targets really far away. And then you have shotguns like trap and skeet, right? Which is like moving clay pigeons with shotguns. Those are the 2 sports you see in the Olympics. Action shooting is different. Action shooting is all about time. So you have multiple targets that you're shooting as quickly as you can. That's basically what makes action shooting different than bullseye shooting or trap and skeet. And there's like sub-genres, just like any sport, just like grappling. There's sub-genres. There's different organizations that have different rules, different equipment, and a big part of it, just like anything else, is nerding out over equipment. I'd say the closest analog is like any sort of racing. So if you were into auto racing, you'd be aware that you'd have different organizations which have different rules on equipment. And not only is your ability to race matter, but also your ability to understand your equipment matters. So that's sort of like that's the closest analog I can think of. It's a very equipment intensive racing sport.
Very cool. And then I remember when you were just getting into this is probably 5 years ago, one of like the first times we went to San Francisco.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, 5. That sounds about right. Yeah. I think it would have been right after like John Wick 1. So it's like 5 years ago, because I remember watching John Wick 1 and being like, I could do like most all of this stuff already. And all of the throws and the grappling and everything. And I'm like, I'm already like 2/3 John Wick. Like there's just like this spot missing. And I was like, oh, I want to learn how to do that really well too. And so, and because I learned through competition and I learned through combat sports or anything like that, like it's got to be competitive for me to feel like I'm understanding something. I immediately jumped into shooting competitions to kind of start figuring out how that works. And that's kind of how it started. And then I bought a gun and went to my first competition. And then it was like 100 people in the competition and I had minimal training and I was like in the middle, like 40th or something. And then I looked on the results of who got first and I just like Facebook stalked them and was just like, hey, I saw you got first in this competition. Teach me. And that's sort of like, that's how I kind of started learning and went from there.
Very cool.
So guy's name was Logan Fowler. He runs he's actually a gunsmith. He runs like a parts company. And I was doing private lessons at his property with him. Then he found out what I do. And then we started trading private lessons. So that's was super cool. Yeah.
Is he the one that you were telling me like held the gun differently than everybody else?
No. So there's a guy named Bob Vogel who is kind of famous for revolutionizing a grip a little bit. And everyone kind of now does something like what he does. Yeah, that's for semi-auto handgun. So like this is just like grappling. You have different equipment for different divisions. You can compare it to like gi versus no gi, or you compare it to Naga versus Grappler's Quest or ADCC or IBJJF. They're all gonna have different rules. And so there's like different equipment for different divisions and different techniques that work for that equipment. And then you also have, just like with the martial arts, you have like dogmatic holdovers, people who are ignoring results and just doing stuff that they've always done. That was, I think, one of the most interesting things going into like the competitive shooting community is seeing the same dumb stuff that you see in the grappling world. Like you can just see it's the same thing. Like you have a group of people that are not thinking critically about what they're doing or saying, oh, I do it this way because I've always done it this way, which is like the worst reason to do something. Or I was always taught. That's another reason that's never a reason to do something. I was always taught. And then you have people just like in grappling, people results oriented, someone who might win a lot of stuff and think that's the reason why what they're doing must be correct versus like critically thinking about what they're doing and seeing if that's actually holding them back. It's interesting. Like it was actually, I think, much easier to start to learn competitive shooting because of grappling, because I already understood how to interpret the things I was observing, like listening to someone talk as an instructor, watching what somebody does, seeing how it's different than what they're saying, whatever. Like it's the same as learning how to grapple, right? Navigating personalities and it's all similar. So it wasn't like an insurmountable hurdle, changing sports like that.
Very cool.
That's pretty interesting to me, and especially because doing like our dojo camps, and it was always just centered around the grappling, but it was always fun to hang out and talk about these things. And now you're doing the camp and it's split, right, between the shooting and the grappling. So do you have a lot of people coming that want to do the shooting and they're learning the grappling, or more grapplers still coming?
No, it's the other way around. So it's way easier to learn the fundamentals of shooting than grappling, like way easier, right? Like grappling is an incredibly technically dense activity, right? Like you can't, I compare grappling, you compare like board games. Let's compare like, if we're going to compare board games to sports, combat sports, we talk about Magic the Gathering a lot, right? Magic the Gathering being an analog for grappling. Magic the Gathering is an analog for grappling because it is so technically dense, right? Like just being able to play it all is a huge hurdle, right?
Oh yeah.
Just like if you want, let's say I want to play a game of Magic with someone who's never played before, like that's an ordeal, And then once you try to get them on board and they kind of understand, you're not really playing with them. Like they don't really understand, and they won't really understand for years, to be honest. Like they can't just start playing with us. That's how grappling is. Like you can't just be like, oh, let me show you some stuff and then you can come roll with us. Like you can do that, but we know they're not really able to do the thing. There's too much things they don't understand, right? And there's not all sports are like this. Like we can get other sports where it's not as technically dense. You can play the game relatively quickly. It doesn't mean you'll play it at a high level, but you'll just play the game. I'm not suggesting that that somebody can quickly get to the point where they can play play soccer at a high level. I'm not saying they can do that, but I can get you to play the game of soccer within 15 minutes of meeting you, like understanding what is happening, right? Like it doesn't mean that you'll be good at it, but you'll understand what is happening. That's not the case with magic. It's not the case with grappling, unfortunately, and so it's technically dense. Shooting is not technically dense. Shooting, if you look at the equipment, it is. Like if you look at understanding the equipment, understanding the literal rocket science of ballistics and learning how that works, especially if you're loading your own ammunition or modifying your own gear, that's technically dense. But the actual active shooting isn't that technically dense. So you can get someone to play the game within a day, some of the games, relatively quickly, relatively safely. So I definitely focus on, you have to have a certain amount of experience with grappling, and you need no experience in shooting to do the camps. That's how I do it. I don't think I'd ever do it the other way. Plus, grappling is a really good filter for personality types. So if you have been able to do 2 years of grappling, like you've been able to go into a gym and get beat up and work really hard and struggle and think critically and just deal with what it's like to grapple. It says a lot about the way your brain works and your ability to cope with the reality that I'm going to present you on this new activity you're not familiar with. So I think it's a great metric. Like we were joking last camp that you could have a shooting only camp. I could have a shooting only camp, but still require 2 years of grappling, just because it would make it easier to teach people. Like I understand that they can handle the expectation that it's going to take a long time to get good at something. They can handle the expectation that it's going to be difficult and coordination is required. Like a lot of people coming from grappling know that, where someone coming not from grappling might not do anything in their lives that are like that.
Yeah.
How was it when you did your private with the number one shooter and you were piggybacking off of like different teachings?
You mean, how was it for him?
Yeah, like learning the grappling.
It was super tough. It was super tough. Like whenever I've tried to teach just shooters a couple times, just shooters into grappling, like their expectations on themselves are too high. Like what they think they're going to be able to learn in a 2 days of training is just way too high. It's like you cannot get this ball rolling that quickly. And again, there's a lot of other games that you can. Grappling is just not one of them. Like you can't take a weekend seminar and have the qualifications to understand anything about grappling in a weekend at all. It's just you guys know that's true. And there are people that are selling it, but you can't. I'm not saying in 2 days you can be a hyper competent shooter, but compared to grappling in 2 days with a good instruction, you can be, you could have moved, say 60% through like the 0 to 60. You can get 0 to 60 in 2 days. And then you'll be at that mid-level. I understand how my equipment works. I know how to be safe. Like I have a basic understanding of what I'm supposed to be doing. And now I've got my ladder like on the right wall and I can climb on my own. I can't even get you to be at that point in grappling in 2 days, right? Where you can be, okay, hey, you kind of got it. Now go work with your friends. I can't really do that. I mean, no one can do that, I don't think.
Yeah, I think that takes a long time to get to that point. I mean, like probably like purple belt level, that's 60%, where if you have another competent training partner, you can kind of start figuring stuff out on your own.
Yeah.
But to get people there, it takes a lot of not only a lot of teaching, but you just being on the mat and experimenting on your own and trying things and failing.
Yeah, like it's just too many techniques. It's too technically dense. And even though most of us are trying to reduce the amount of techniques we're doing in grappling, most of the high-level people I know are trying to do as little as they can on the mats They're trying to constantly replace a bunch of junk with like, okay, can I do this one thing and that takes care of these 5 things? And good grapplers narrow. They have to actually learn thousands of things first. We'll call it the pro belt level, before they can start shaving off to figure out what are the 5 things they need to do to be good. You can't just learn 5 things, because the 5 things that, if I say, hey, Hillary, like, show me the 5 things that matter in grappling, you'll show me your 5 things, but maybe only 1 or 2 of them will even work for me. And I wouldn't know for years before I realized that's not going to work for me. So like, we have to be exposed to all these things, and then I'll build like the version that works for me, or you do build a version that works for you. That's not a lot of sports are like that. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I think it's annoying. I think it's annoying how technically dense grappling is and how technically dense magic is. But once you're really into it, it's fun. But in the beginning, it's like, oof, it's hard.
I think one of the things I like about training with you and the way you're able to look at different rule sets, especially when you were competing in grappling and you were doing SAMBO, and then you were doing Jiu-Jitsu and no-gi Jiu-Jitsu, and then you went to the combat wrestling world, and how you were able to look at the metagame and just adapt your game to the rule set. Can you talk about that a little bit and what the metagame is?
Yeah, so I think that when you have grappling, which is an umbrella term for several different rule sets, the key to being able to do cross competition is to make sure that the pillars of your grappling are ones that are consistently useful over multiple rule sets. And so the desire, if you started in one specific rule set, it's real common to look at like, what are the chief most useful approaches that work in that specific game, but it will actually hamstring you if you look at it that way. Because then what happens is you're relying on sort of some bizarre fringe aspects of a sport that might seem like the pillars of the sport, but they're really not. And understanding like what the game is built on a broad spectrum, and then what are the weird things that seem like the game is built on, but it's really not. And they're just like fringe aspects that are culturally prominent, or they're socially prominent, or they just seem to be really important that you can ignore or abuse. I guess that's kind of what metagaming is, like understanding, okay, so let's use a sport that is not at all grappling. Let's use a sport that without knowing anything about the history, but just looking at the rules, I can figure out where a metagaming problem happened that changed the rules. Let's talk about basketball. I don't know anything about basketball, but I have observed the rules when watching it. And I observed there's a little clock that says how long you can be in that little 3-point zone before you take a shot, right? And you need to take a shot if you're there for a certain amount of time. You familiar with this? Without knowing anything about basketball, that tells me that somebody found a way to abuse that location on the court to the point where they had to have a meeting and be like, hold on a second, something's wrong with this rule set. And they had to make it where you couldn't hang out there for a long period of time. So somebody basically metagamed. They found that within the game, there's another game that they could be playing that is not the intention of the game designers. And they abused it until the rules changed. And I think that the reason why Magic is so successful is Magic protects itself from it getting stale, because they simply flush out old cards and add in new cards. So by the time someone's figured out, oh, if you hang out in this part of the court for too long, it breaks the game changes. That's what makes Magic different than everything else, and why it protects itself from rules changes. Grappling, on general, all the different grappling rule sets aren't designed by game designers, professional game designers anyways. They're designed by people that like to wrestle. And a lot of times they create these rule sets that are rife for abuse, and they may not realize it. And then the games get super weird. And then you can figure out either how to manipulate them if you want to, or manipulate the community if you want to get around it. Like, I think that's interesting. I guess that's one version of metagaming. What's another version of metagaming? That's more about rules manipulation. I think you were also thinking of metagaming of like the cultural manipulation. Like, what do people just do, and the rules aren't making them do it? They're just doing it because everyone else is doing it. That's another level, right?
Like the way you look at the way people are playing the game, like what techniques are popular, and then how you can, if you know people are going to be trying to do these techniques, or like, you play Magic and everybody's playing a red deck, it's like, all right, like everybody's playing a red deck, let me play a white deck with a bunch of cards against red decks. Or, like, let me build my Jiu-Jitsu game in a way. If I'm doing Berimbolo, I should be able to, deal with a Berimbolo. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, that's interesting. That's actually not a rules-specific thing. It's more like a cultural shift where people start to gravitate around a certain approach, and then they just lock themselves into that approach. And someone who's able to observe it can go, that there must be something to that can be abused. One of the things that I've been thinking about lately a lot is back kind of on that note of like, how do I start the process of metagaming? Okay, it goes like this. What can I consistently make the match do? And then how can I use that to my advantage? So here's an example. I've been teaching a lot about this lately. You know how hard it is to stop somebody from making you take their back? It's almost impossible. Like, if you're mounted on me, I can make you take my back. It is so hard for you to stop me. It's so hard for you to keep me in mount and not me force you to take my back. And how you know that is mounts on a popular pin in Sambo, in Judo, or in wrestling. It is so hard to pin someone that way, right? That mount shape, which we know is super strong in grappling, is super strong because the way out is I have to expose my back as the way out, right? But if you look at that in reverse, it's kind of crazy that you can't stop me from doing it. Like, you can't stop me from saying, Nelson, you have to choke me up from the back right now. You can't, and you have to. And you're like, no, I want to do something right. No, you don't get to. You have to take my back. That's weird. Like, that's a weird thing that I have control over. And you can look at that and go, oh, well, that's bad. You're turning, you're giving up your back. And that's a good thing for them. But the fact that I can dictate it, like the fact that I can tell you have to do it whenever I want, is super powerful. Now, the question is, how do we profit from that? That's the hard part, right? Like, if I'm like, watch, I can make anybody in the room take my back. And they're like, okay, cool. But now what? Like, well, I got to figure that part out. But starting off with, like, what can I make the match do is like the way my brain works first. And then I work backwards to like, well, how can I abuse that? And that's sort of like the way that I have typically been metagaming. And it would go back to, I can make anybody take a single leg. That's an example. I can make anybody take a single leg. I don't care what you're doing. I can make you wrap around a single. Oh, well, they can take you down from a single. It's like, yeah, maybe, but I can dictate this behavior. Now, how can I abuse the fact that I've dictated this behavior? I think that's the core to the way I metagame different situations, different rule sets.
1 second here. We got a child waking up from a nap.
Okay.
So yeah, metagame and the single leg and escaping mount by turning to your back. And there's a bunch of positions you think about that, while not what I was gonna say is you're right. It's like, sometimes there's things you can do where like it's really hard for your opponent not to take him, or like, if we're standing, people is gravitating to the same collar tie, especially at the early, like, at the lower belt levels. So being able to know that, hey, like, if we get in range, this is how most likely I'm out. This is how somebody's going to grab you. So then just being able to be like, okay, like, as soon as he goes there, you can shock by, you can get a Russian tie up by sliding the hand off. And like, these are the kind of things that you can think about, and like, you kind of like, you get to predict, because that's the most common thing that's going to happen.
Right. So let's say you have like two levels of metagaming. The level you're talking about is knowing what is typical, right? And being able to abuse it. The level that I'm talking about is ignoring what is typical and being able to enforce everyone to behave a certain way. right? So knowing what is typical requires like a lot of like studies of that year's behaviors and matches, watching footage, seeing what's happening, right? And that is important and cool and definitely worth doing. And a lot of people are doing that. Like a lot of people are like, okay, let's see what's happening. How can I interact with that? But there's another level of like, I don't care what you're doing. I can make it this every time. And so if you can try to get to that level, like for me, like a lot of my matches look the same and have looked the same. Like let's say for 1 year of me competing, I'll have the same interactions over and over and over again, because it's not so much that I'm observing what they're doing. It's that I'm doing something that they have no choice but to do what I want them to do. And this go back to magic. You try to find a methodology that can only be broken by fringe techniques, not by easy techniques, is the idea. So here's an example. In Magic, you might play 9 games in a Grand Prix and you have a deck and you know that there's a deck out there that can beat yours. But you know that yours will probably beat like 7 out of the 9. So you kind of don't stress too much about the weird ones, right? So when trying to build a plan, you try to build a plan that hoses most things, understanding that it's not going to hose everything. That's just the way it works. There's no foolproof plan. So here's an example. Let's say we're striking, okay? And the only way to beat me is with a spinning back heel kick to the face. Let's just say it's the only way to beat me, right? Now that's bad. Being spinning back heel kicked in the face is bad. But if that's the way you have to beat me versus the only way to beat me is a jab cross to the face. Well, okay, the problem is a jab cross to the face is going to be more accessible to most people. And so there's dangers in that being your plan. So usually you want to have the plan where the only way to beat you is something niche, right? And so finding that out is like the sweet spot of metagaming. So for instance, my stand-up typically, like, you have to work a single, you'll never get a double, you'll never get a snap down, you have to be able to finish off the single, and the only way to really hose it, the way I stand up, is you're going to have to be able to take my back from standing, because finishing off a single is so difficult, right? So I went through, I don't know, 2016 through 2017 with the same stance work, never getting scored on, pretty much never getting scored on. And then in Japan, I get flying rear naked choked by that guy at the Combat Wrestling Worlds. You guys were there for that. So it turns out, and you watch this guy's matches, he wins the other 2 matches with the same thing. So it turns out this guy's jam is the spinning back heel kick. It is the like fringe technique that hoses my methodology. So I lose the match to this guy with a flying rear naked choke who's good at flying rear naked chokes. And so you go, okay, do I warp what I'm doing to not get flying rear naked choked? Or do I look at the math and go, okay, like right now, this beats most stuff, so it's probably fine. You know, it's kind of like that's a weird part of your personal game design that you have to like constantly make checks for, you know?
Very cool.
I think.
Yeah. You are known for, you're like one of the original, you're like one of the American guys that made leg locks cool.
The kids love the leg locks.
The kids love it. And especially, I think a lot of the guys I've taken your seminars are the amount of depth that you go into the ankle lock. I don't think the ankle lock gets enough love these days. And like, you know, I like the thing too is like the way the metagame has evolved is more and more like leg locks and back kicks seems to be like the no-gi metagame right now. And how does it feel to be one of the guys that was early on this jam and kind of like, you know, at the time when you were doing this stuff, a lot of people were still like looking down upon being the dirty leg lock guy. And now it's just so commonplace. And like, you know, now it's like part of beginning curriculums.
Yeah, well, I think that has to do with that. Actually, that shift has to do with the high level rule set changing to EBI. I believe that's why that started this, because so I was doing leg locks. So coming from a Sambo background where leg entanglements, more importantly, like reaping, was legal at all levels, and you didn't in Sambo, you don't have points for passing or sweeping. So you're going to have a lot more leg entanglements, right? If you don't have points for passing or sweeping, you're going to have leg locks, right? Because if you have one guy down and one guy up, that's how they're going to interact, right? So then when you go to sports like I was doing, like Nagas and grappling tournaments, and Nagas, which have a lot of legal leg locks, but also have points for passing and sweeping, you weren't getting a lot of leg locks because you were awarded for the pass sweep exchange, right? So I was doing leg locks in like a lot of those rule sets, being successful early on where a lot of people weren't, because maybe culturally, like you said, at the time they were looked down upon from people from jiu-jitsu backgrounds. And I would say it was like that up until basically EBI. And so what changed was a rule set came out that became popular, and there was money in it, and it was broadcast, and the rule set was not awarding passing or sweeping, and it was submission only. But it wasn't MMA, so there weren't any strikes. So now if you're going to have a rule set where no one can hit you and they want to leg lock you because they can't pass or sweep, you're going to have a lot more people in a seated up guard. And then you have basically a seated guard person, a top person like smashing in like this. You're going to have leg locks. And so the leg locks become super powerful in that rule set because there's really nothing else you can do in that position, especially if I'm sitting up. Also, the second thing I said earlier, because you can stop people from mounting you basically by turning, the back position is going to come up all the time, because as nogi, you can't stop me. Like in nogi, you can't pin me nogi. If you could pin me in nogi, then the wrestling rules would look the same as the judo rules. So in judo, the pin is 20 seconds. In sambo, it's 20 seconds. In wrestling, how long is the pin?
1 second, right?
Instant, right? Because it's impossible to pin somebody in nogi. You cannot hold someone's shoulders on the ground for that long. It's remarkable. So because of that, the only thing stopping them from turning is the fear, is the threat of activation of the back, or that's the only thing stopping them from turning. But if they're fighting tooth and nail to not let you control them, they're just going to turn. So at a high level, the rear naked choke and the heel hook are going to be the only things that are going to go down if you're not going to have any points. Like, it makes sense. So that rule set got everybody excited. And then from that point, it went super wide. So I think that there was no way that I was ever going to, or people that were interested in doing it earlier on, were going to ever make it go that wide just by saying, oh, you should do this. It's a good way to win the game, because no one else does it. It's really, I think, a change in what the rules were that really helped get people interested in this. And now people are doing tournaments that aren't EBI, because EBI is not everywhere, but they're doing those tournaments with those skills that they kind of saw highlighted in there. So it's super interesting. I don't think it's just like culturally all of a sudden there is a shift. I think it's the rules. Like, the rules just dictated the behavior, and then that caused a cultural shift,
Well, you're right. I mean, there's no EVI rules is still popular, even though there's no more EVI. It's only the combat jiu-jitsu worlds now,
right?
Which is its own thing, where there's a striking. But now, one of the things I've seen was IBJJF even changed the rules, and now they allow brown and black belts are allowed to heel hook in the adult division, which is kind of silly. Like, at that point, you just let everyone do it,
right?
And even at that point, when it was legal, there's still a lot of people ignoring the lock game, going into these tournaments and just getting heel hooked in 30 seconds. And now it's been a year since that started happening, and now you see even a more a second wave, third wave at this point of we need to learn this, because for a long time these IBJJF only schools were protecting themselves by the rules. It's oh, you don't need to learn that because you don't do it in IBJJF tournaments. But now the last safe haven is gone, And
what do you mean protecting themselves by the rules? Everyone protects themselves by the rules.
By saying that was heel hooks were not allowed in IBJJF tournaments. So a lot of these IBJJF only schools were not teaching leg locks because they were not part of the IBJJF curriculum. You cannot do it in an IBJJF tournament.
But I want to point out that I don't fault them because, I mean, everyone protects themselves from the rules. I mean, how many of you guys work on boxing? I mean, you're protecting yourself from the rules by doing jiu-jitsu from being punched in the face. Like, there's no distinction. It's like everyone's doing it. To me, there's absolutely no shame in going, oh, I only do gi IBJJF, so I don't want to learn heel hooks. It's like, that's totally legit to me because most people aren't doing kickboxing because they're not having to learn strikes, or when they're only learning gi jiu-jitsu. Like, we all protect ourselves from the rules. Like, none of us are worried about what happens if someone knifes us in the middle of a grappling match. Like, everyone's protecting ourselves using the rules. I am a little annoyed, not by you. I'm a little annoyed by this general like holier than thou-ness coming from the new leg lock kids. That is like, we're doing the real stuff, and like everyone else, it's like, no, everyone's just doing whatever. Like the person that is pulling seated guard to dig out a heel hook is not somehow doing something more real than a guy doing judo. Like, everyone's protecting themselves by whatever games they feel like playing, you know, and they're all just games. And whatever games you want to play is the games you want to play. If you're going to say that your jiu-jitsu is better than that person's jiu-jitsu because we work on this rule set or that rule set, it's like, whatever. I don't care. But what I think will be a problem for IBJJF gyms, if you want to call it gyms going forward, isn't so much the introduction of heel hooks in no-gi, brown and black. It's the fact that the heel hooks and the reaping are not in purple, blue, and white. That to me is more of a problem in general, because now you have this quick rule shift all of a sudden that makes running your gym really difficult. So like, what I mean is that, like, take our gym, like in the Bay Area, right? The most common competition we have, is World League, right? So World League has certain rules for, there's similar IBJJF, but they're a little bit different. And so World League is what we're going to take people to. When you're trying to get people to win World League at white belt or blue belt, and post-pandemic, I don't know how everyone else's gyms are, but our gyms are all white belts now. Like, we have just way more white belts than everybody else. We don't have a lot of people that are higher level. So you have a bunch of white belts and blue belts trying to get them into competitions. Okay, so you're going to teach them how to do the rules that's local, the World League rules. Then at higher belts, pearl, brown, black, whatever, or brown, black, they have heel hooks and reaping. How are you supposed to run the room if all of a sudden there's a rule change where now if you have any brown, black belts who are supposed to be rolling with blue belts, that they're supposed to be working on their heel hook game, but these white and blue belts aren't? To me, that's really annoying. Like, I'd honestly rather the rule set be consistent white to black than not. I don't actually care. If you want heel hooks at white belt, I don't actually care. That's fine. If you don't want heel hooks at black belt, I don't care. But for the sake of running a room, it's super weird. And I can't think of that many other sports that are like this, where all of a sudden you're going to get a massive rule shift, and now we have to have a gym that's divided in methodology. I think that's awkward. And so what it's going to cause us to do is we're going to all have to train for the most open rule set, right? And then just shave. So like, everyone's going to learn the heel hooks, everyone's going to learn everything, and then we're going to shave the techniques away for the white and blue. I mean, that's got to be the way to do it. What do you think?
I mean, like, knee bars are always been the issue before, because that was the one that you could only do brown and black. Same with toe holds, and everybody was allowed to do ankle locks, but then you would get into like these weird positions where we get put into an ankle lock and turn it into a knee bar, and then the ref has to the ref has either to stop the match, DQ somebody. People tap to a knee bar even though, like, you know, they put themselves there. So there's always been these awkward positions where, like, if we're going to do leg locks, just let it fly.
Yeah.
You want to say something, Hillary?
I just remember it kind of being the etiquette when you're actually rolling with a teammate within your class, that you always roll to the upper belts rules.
Okay.
But then but there was always some sort of contradiction, like not really being taught moves until more people did get to that level. So yeah, I mean, I agree that it should just be the same rules across the board. Like you should be aware of what's available.
I don't know what the solution is because I've always been training in multiple sports, and like for me it hasn't been an issue because I don't have a hard time learning everything and then shifting. And I definitely started in an environment where you just learned everything. So when I started in New York Combat Sambo, there was nothing you wouldn't learn. So, but we were learning striking, throwing, gi, no gi, chokes, heel hooks, neck cranks, everything. So you learn everything. And then it was like, okay, go to these sports. And what you'd probably end up, the result would be you'd end up with a lot of people that could win at a local level, but not at a high level in anything because they're so broad. And I'm definitely that guy. Like I'm that guy who can show up to, if you go, oh, hey, here's this sport that you've never heard of, and here are the rules, and there's a local village match. I'm like, okay, I could probably win that, you know? But then if they're like, okay, here's the world championships for it, like I'm not going to win that because my methodology has always been like learn everything and then shave away. However, if you're trying to have a championship school in one rule set, let's say IBJJF, you're making it really awkward for those people by having this rule set that does a hard turn at brown belt, a hard turn, right? Like take no-gi, like no-gi, if you have no-gi with IBJJF rules and you remove reaping and heel hooks, and well, actually I use World League rules because World League rules has the ability to where if you take someone down, you don't need to cover them to score. So I can foot sweep you and score, right? I don't need the 3-second coverage like IBJJF, right? So if I can foot sweep you and I score 2, and then you're on the bottom and you cannot reap or heel hook, I don't know how you're supposed to win that match. Like as the bottom person no-gi. Like what are you supposed to do? Like I can just walk straight into your guard and you can't do anything except what? Wrestle up? I just scored on you, bro. You aren't going to do shit if you wrestle up. So what is your plan here? You know? So it's like heavily leaning towards the person who can score a takedown. So, which is great for our gym. Our gym has been doing this in the local world leagues. They take someone down and that guy's stuck. He has no way to win. It's because as long as the standing guy doesn't come down low and stick his hand or neck into that guard, if you can't leg lock and you can't reap and you can't wrestle, I don't know what your plan is. And I mean, you can legally wrestle, but you don't have the skill set to wrestle. So now I'm putting myself in a position where I can just kind of mush into your guard, stand and walk into your guard. You can't leg lock me. It allows a certain approach that, I mean, I certainly enjoy. I like being able to take someone down and then not care about what they can do. But it's going to be weird when all of a sudden at brown belt, now they can heel hook. So now I take you down, but now I can't mush into you as much because now you can win with the reap and the heel hook. So I don't know. I think that if the intention is to create a rule set that a person can go from, well, you know what? How about in kids divisions, right? So in kids divisions for jiu-jitsu, there are other things that suddenly get sprung upon them, right? Like guillotines. What else happens around the kid to?
I mean, there's a bunch of, like, depends on the tournament. A lot of them allow like shoulder locks because kids are notorious not to tap into like kimuras or omoplatas. So those get outlawed. Any type like triangles, you're not allowed to pull on the head with 2 hands. Right. What else? Anything else you remember? I mean, one of the things that's silly to me is head outside singles are outlawed by the IBJJF in the kids divisions.
And at white belt, right?
And a white belt, yeah, because people were grabbing the belt and falling back, and people were pointing their heads.
Yeah, and then at blue belt, you're welcome to do that to yourself, right?
You can DDT people at blue belt
all day. So I don't know. I mean, as game designers, I'm not so sure that kids to adults is weird because with kids, very few kids transition to adults. I don't know, as an instructor, I've observed like there's usually a gap, the gap of high school, where all the kids go away. So there are very few kids that even make that transition. And the kids that make that transition are so hyper competitive that they will adjust no problem. But the average kid doesn't transition like that. They usually go to like middle school and then, you know, discover, you know, dating and then quit. and then come back in like college. That's what I've observed for most kids. But yeah, so Hillary, you don't care if it's allowed or not allowed, but you think that it should just be the same from white to black.
I like the idea of just being exposed again to what's available and what rules you should eventually expect. Because when you start the sport, that's where you want to be, right? You want to get your through the belts up to black belt. So why not be exposed to it? I think the biggest problem was finally learning it. It was more important to learn what was happening so you can defend it properly. Like that was the biggest eye opener to me when you started teaching leg locks, was how to realize what was happening and receive it and defend it properly. And that was like the biggest scare, I think, when it was learning the new rules at brown belt and what to expect in a competition. It's like you might feel safe in your room with your teammates, but when you need to expect something in a competition, like the unexpected, it's like I'm not necessarily concerned about how to apply it, but how do I defend it so I don't hurt myself?
The other thing too is the other day I was watching. There's a Reddit thread about a class at Globetrotters camp, and I forget the guy's name, but he was teaching a leg lock class, and one of the things he talked about is false positives. And he was using this term because when you learn leg locks and your training partners don't know leg locks, a lot of times they're tapping to stuff that's not there yet.
Right.
So you get in this habit. It's like, oh, if I do this, I get a tap. But then when you grapple with somebody that knows what's up, you don't get the tap anymore. But you get used to like getting a reap, and people are like, oh, you got it. It's like, no, man, I haven't dug the heel out. Like, I haven't hip into it yet. Like we're not there yet.
Yeah.
So that's what I think. If we had the whole room exposed to it, you get to get rid of that kind of situation.
Yeah. So I think that, okay, so here, let's back up. Let's circle back. We had talked about how do you metagame so that you can be successful in lots of rule sets. Okay. And I think here's a solution. Everybody, and I've actually seen this happen in my own gym the wrong way. So I brought this up. Everybody at every level should be learning all the techniques: reaping, heel hooking, throwing, everything, right? Their game plan should not be built around something that is niche to specific rule sets. So, for instance, we had a student that could win Naga Expert, and they did, but can't win Blue Belt IBJJF, right? So there's something wrong with the way they're grappling, if that's the case, right? And what they're doing is they're latching onto a specific technique set that is seemingly hyper prominent in Naga Expert, which is going to be scissoring leg locky stuff, right? But once that's removed, they can't hang with blue belts, right? So you should learn all of that stuff, but you should make sure your method is solid through any rule set. And then the bonus of heel hooks being allowed is you can use that when it comes up, but you shouldn't have to lean on that. I mean, I've won so many things between like 2008 and like 2013. I won so many things knowing so little just because heel hooks were allowed, right? Like, so heel hooks were allowed. I could just go win competitions because I was good at that one thing, right? And it wasn't till I ran into somebody who knew what was up and also like knew how to grapple that I realized like I actually kind of suck. Like I only know how to apply this one thing really well. And that methodology was squashed once I learned to somebody who knows what's up. Then I had to like backfill with like how to grapple, you know, and then actually come forward as like a competent grappler who could handle most any rule set and just know enough to be able to be aware of the slight changes. So I think from the beginning, if we're going to be doing how do we run a room correctly, you teach heel hooks and everything from the beginning. But make sure that your students can win at white, blue, purple, brown, and black. So how do you do that? Make sure their approach isn't completely wrapped up on a thing you could only do at brown and black, but make sure they understand it. I think that might be the most consistent approach. I think, unless you have a lot of local competitions that have heel hooks at the white belt level, which those exist. There's like local, Johnny's grappling meetup. You know what I mean? Round robin, heel hook only. There's a lot of crap like that floating around. You could always go to those and just do those and avoid the white, blue, purple events if you wanted to. That's one approach. I suppose you do that, but I think it'd be probably healthier as a martial artist to be able to win at everything. So make sure your plan is solid, like all the way through. I think that's the way I want to be teaching and be doing it myself,
Well, the issue with that is I know we've had this conversation before, is time. It takes a lot of time to be good at everything. And it's like, it's a big commitment, especially like, you're a middle-aged guy that trains twice a week for like, an hour and a half each session. And that's when like people just gravitate towards like, hey, I'm getting really good at this thing. I'm just going to do this one thing. So like I remember having one student that got really good at triangles. And like that's all he wanted to do. And people would defend the triangle by falling back. And he would never come up until the top. And I was like, hey, what are you doing? Take the sweep. He's like, yeah, but I can't triangle from the top yet. It's like, no, man. It's like, come up, figure out how to pass. If you want to finish with a triangle, you got to figure out how to, like, triangle from mat or side control.
Sure.
I need you to, like, evolve a little bit. And, like, you see it all the time. And, like, I catch myself doing it sometimes. And there's things like, I was talking to my brother-in-law who's going to start training. And I was telling him, like, hey, like, I've been doing this for 14 years. And every time I train, I'm picking up something new. And it's amazing how, like, it keeps changing. And there's things we used to do all the time we can't do anymore because people figure out how to put you in a really bad spot if you do that one thing. And sometimes you're even aware where the holes in your game are. I was rolling at the Jiu-Jitsu gym we go to, and there was a blue belt, and he kept doing the same thing to everybody. Like he wrestled a little bit in high school, so he insisted on starting on top, and then the other person usually conceded guard to him. And once you set guard on him, he would like immediately try to snap you down into a guillotine or do like a flying kimura, like a kimura roll on you.
Mm-hmm.
And he did it to me like the first round, and I was like, okay, whatever. Like I just kept sweeping him, coming on top, mount, triangle. And he kept insisting. Every time I swept him, he would like fight really hard to come up. And I just kept playing guard, like sitting back to guard and doing the same thing over and over. So I rolled a second roll with him, and then now I started from the feet. And he was like, one, he was shocked that he had to wrestle me.
Mm-hmm.
And two, he was even more shocked that I kept throwing him. And towards halfway through the roll, he started pulling guard because he didn't want to get thrown anymore.
Right.
And then once he was in guard, he had no guard because he never works on it. He's so used to people just conceding bottom position,
right?
Conceding top position to him. And now his guard is getting smashed. I've been guard passing for 14 years.
Right.
So it is like, at the end of the class, I was like, hey, you need to work on passing and you need to work on your guard because you're doing this one thing. And I don't know how successful you are, but it's not going to work forever. And you have this giant gaping hole in your game.
Yeah. Results oriented. He's being Roddy, right? So that's something that is I'm always thinking about, and a lot of people will send me like memes and gifs about like leg lock crap. They'll be like, "Oh, leg locks forever." I'm like, "Nah, man, leg locks for when they are appropriate." Like it's like,
can we make that a t-shirt?
It's like people misunderstand my perspective that like I'm like some hyper excited leg lock guy. It's like I'm only the leg lock guy if y'all aren't. That's basically how that works. And then for like 8 years, nobody else was, so I could win with this. But like once we're all on the same page of how these work, they just fall into position of a tool that you need just like anything else, right? So it's an important skill set, but like Kimuras and leg locks are the best shortcut to the middle of any technique, right? It is a shortcut to the middle. you can look competent compared to blue belts and pearl belts very quickly with Kimuras and leg locks. They are not shortcuts to the top, right? And so people will take those shortcuts to the middle and go, oh, look, I'm now grappling at this level. And that's awesome because I've only been training for 1 year and now I'm grappling at the middle tier. And it's like, dude, if you don't go quickly and backfill, you're going to be stuck here for a while, and that's sort of the problem with those shortcuts. I'm not saying don't take them, but you need to be willing to go and backfill the stuff that you don't understand. If you want to compete continuously compete over the next 5 or 6 or 10 years or whatever. I mean, if those aren't your goals and you just want to this is what I want to do this one thing and just be this one annoying guy in the gym who has this sweet technique, that can be that's your lifestyle choice. That's fine. But if your intentions are, I want to be the best I possibly can be, then you're going to have to be relatively well-rounded and have a pretty narrow focus for something that works against 90% of people in 90% of situations, right? So not something that works on 100% of people in 10% of situations, which is what I think a lot of people will focus on. I would say that the least transmittable behavior that we see in most jiu-jitsu gyms is going to be the seated guard, right? The seated guard is the narrowest of the most common practice things for different rule sets. It works really well in a rule set where they have to attack your guard because the rules won't call you for stalling. They'll call them for stalling. And they're not allowed to hit you. And you don't have limited time on the ground. So that's basically most jiu-jitsu competitions. But when you stem out of those to sambo, judo, combat wrestling, combat sambo, mixed martial arts, that skill set seems to get super narrow and less useful. So I think not that you shouldn't do seated guard or that can't be your favorite thing. It's just interesting that one of the most common aspects of jiu-jitsu training that you'll see in your average gym is the least transmittable skill set when the second you leave that rule set. So I'm wary of things like that. It'd be the same thing for, there's a lot of techniques in wrestling, a lot of techniques in folk style, freestyle wrestling that are going to be used a lot that are super narrow that won't transmit out of that rule set. That's true for anything. Let's take sambo. All right. So the Russian tie over to the belt grip in a jacket. This is hyper dominant. It's an incredibly powerful technique. You're going to be able to throw people all day from this position. If you get it, you're probably going to score. You're going to score in jiu-jitsu. You're probably going to score in sambo. You'll score in judo if you do it within 3 seconds, right? The second you add strikes, it goes away. So no one takes this grip in combat sambo. They grab here, they go here, and then they just eat fists from the other side, knees, whatever. And so it's fascinating with sambo because you have combat sambo and sports sambo going on in the same competitions. You're watching both mats going, and you'll see this hyper important dominant technique, which is the Russian tie with the over the belt grip being used all the time on one mat and never touched on the other mat. And that's fascinating to me. Is so does that mean you shouldn't work this technique? No, man, that's my jam in sports sambo. I've thoroughly used that technique to my advantage. I just have to try to also understand that I won't be able to jump ship with that technique. That one won't transmit over to combat sambo. So if you're interested in being multidisciplined for sports, you'd have to digest and be okay and understand how much of my time will go into each individual aspect if that specific thing won't translate. Some people don't think this way. I know plenty of people that are judo for life, whatever the rules are in judo, that's all I care about, or fencing or whatever the hell. People are going to pick a thing that's my focus. I think some of us three especially, are kind of martial artists first. So our minds are generally thinking a little bit broader a lot of the time of all the things. But not everyone thinks that way. I don't necessarily think they have to. However, if you are a individual, I only want to do this one sport, there is a benefit of thinking broader in that you can mine techniques from other disciplines that your metagame might not have seen. So We see that in wrestling a lot. Have you been watching just like right now what high school wrestling looks like? There's so much funky stuff going on right now. Like people shooting Imanaris, rolling knee bars to get rolls and pins.
All these kids that were doing.
You know what I'm saying? You're getting all kinds of, let's say, jiu-jitsu-y, grappling oriented techniques that are sliding sideways into high school wrestling.
Well, also if you watch judo, the Mongolians are doing a bunch of like front headlocks in judo. You're just the lapels, pulling you down, slapping a front headlock on, and then like just driving you to your butt and pinning you. It's amazing. And they haven't outlawed it yet.
Yeah, I mean, what was the chick that won the Olympic finals? Like, does it with like a front headlock cement job pin. Do you remember this? It was like, and the chick that she pinned was like, what? Like it was.
Like, that's not a thing.
Yeah, and it's crazy to watch because you're talking about the Olympic finals. I'm sorry I don't know their names. I should be more aware of that. But the woman who got pinned, she tries to turn, realize she's running into a lapel choke, turns back, realize she's being pinned, and you see a look in her face like, this is not how I thought this would go down. Like, this is not how I thought this match was going to go. And it's just, so there is a benefit, 100% a benefit of mining outside techniques and bringing them over and seeing what works and what applies. One thing that is real common is to go, well, this combat sport or martial arts better than that one, so anything that one has to offer can't be useful. And mixed martial arts has repeatedly taught us that that's not true, right? So you'll see plenty of things coming over from what would once be considered to be non-effective combat sports, things from Taekwondo, karate, or whatever, that become hyper prominent in mixed martial arts. And the metagame is hit totally blindsided by it because they're like, I was told by my coach 10 years ago that Muay Thai was the only source for striking, and I did this when everyone showed me anything else, and now I'm being spinning back heel kicked in the face. What the hell? It's like, well, you could have paid attention, but your desire to shrink your observations too early caused the problem. In the beginning of this interview, I had talked about how you got to learn a whole bunch of stuff early on and then start chopping away to what's useful for you. If you just go, okay, coach, what are the 5 important things? You're not going to understand anything. So when you're trying to figure out what is good, you don't want to too quickly, you don't want to too quickly ignore chunks of information. You want to take all that information in and then slowly shave down to, your personal approach. But you can't be like, I'm only going to mine from, I was told that mixed martial arts can only come from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, and folk style wrestling. I'm going to ignore everything else. And if someone shows me something good from them, I'm going to say, no, it's not good. Or, well, that's probably not even from that. It's probably from this thing. Because it hurts my brain to assume that there could be good things from that. People do that all the time. And then the hyper creative people aren't doing that. And then they're kind of blowing up the spot of, take the leg locks in grappling. People had to be comfortable mining heavily from the Japanese submission wrestlers, the Japanese catch wrestlers, the Sambo guys, and going, that's all really important, and putting it in so that the more narrow-minded jiu-jitsu purists of 2020 can say, I'm a jiu-jitsu purist, check out my Imanari to heel hook. It's amazing how people's brains work. But that Imanari to heel hook doesn't exist if your betters weren't looking outside of the sport. Now people can say, this is just good jiu-jitsu. And like, okay, but it wasn't good jiu-jitsu 10 years ago. It took somebody to look outside the sport and grab it and pull it in. But it's always been that way. My arm dragged to a naked choke, good jiu-jitsu. No, man, that was Marcel Garcia doing wrestling. It only became good jiu-jitsu later. So yeah, the purists benefit from the creative people augmenting and bringing in and changing it so that the purists can be like, I'm a purist because I do only what is here. But nothing works that way. It's there because someone stole it and brought it in.
Very true.
Preach, Reilly, preach.
So what else?
makes a lot of sense.
I think this is a good stopping point. Thank you for your time, because we got 2 restless babies in the house.
Okay. Well, we didn't even talk about
Tyson.
We didn't talk about magic or shooting that much, but maybe we'll do another one sometime. And
well, I think we got to touch on magic and shooting enough, but we'd definitely love to have you back. For people that don't know how to find you online, and if people are interested in the shooting camps, where can they find more information?
So the camps have been all sold out. So they've been selling out very quickly. So because I've been backfilling from like wait lists, but if there's ever a camp that's not sold out, I'll put it on rdojo.com. I'll put it on guidancesteel.com, GUIDANCESTEEL. Guidance Steel Shooting is the shooting instruction company that I run. rdojo is the grappling company. I'll put it on both. Or you can find me on Facebook or Instagram at rdojo on Instagram, at Guidance Steel at Instagram, and I'll post any camp information there, or anything fun that I'm doing.
Awesome. Thank you for your time, Reilly.
Thank you, Reilly.
Cool.
Thank you for listening, Panda Nation. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Inverted Gear podcast. You can find us at invertedgear.com, as well as your favorite podcast app. Don't forget to give us a like, and we'll see you soon.